So let's talk about the opposite effect then. So someone instills or has an experience of trauma. And I've surely had many of that in my life. And I know from a war perspective, there's a lot of visual trauma that happens that then is sitting into their brain long term, creating those nightmares, creating this sense of depression, and identity structure and pulling, the questioning of God, all of these pieces. Talk to us about how you can rewire, reestablish just health and wholeness.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a great topic. So, everything from your brain that is trauma related is actually stored in the amygdala, which is the fear center of the brain. And so, what we want to do is we want to take the trauma from the fear center and bring it to the frontal lobe. Let me preface it with this: when we have a traumatic experience, the hallmark trait of PTSD is avoidance. We don't want to deal with it. Right. So the more we stuff it, the more we avoid it, the worse it gets over time. It just starts to build up and it becomes like this poison to our mind, which impacts our body. No doubt about it. So when we bring it from the amygdala to the frontal lobe, just by being aware of it and choosing to acknowledge it, we start to break it down. We have to look at it from different angles. Okay. So my bottom line up front is God's not the author of the bad things, period. God neurobiologically wired us to love and to be loved. And in order to have love, we have to have relationship. And in order to have relationship, we have to have free will. So he's never going to take it away. People are going to do the goofiest, stupidest, meanest, ugliest things with their free will, right? And God's not going to stop that, but he's going to make a way through the wilderness for us. He's going to make beauty for ashes in light of it. Jesus wasn't immune to the pain and suffering of the world. He endured the cross so we can endure whatever comes our way. And so when they get unstuck from the idea that God was the author and they start to recognize, no, wait, God was on my side, especially for a deployed setting. Yea, as I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil because you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they bring me comfort. When they start to recognize all the divine connections during their traumatic event, when they start to look at it from different angles, and sometimes I even have them re-script the trauma. How would you like it to end? Or how can we bring peace to this traumatic experience? What will allow your soul to rest? And so they will visualize, they will remember a combination of things. And then what happens is that toxic memory, the poison becomes extracted from it, because all the way down to the basic substrates, all the way down to the proteins, all the way down to the DNA, the memory changes. And when it's changed, the properties of what allowed it to be filed in the fear center of the brain no longer exist. So it just files back into the hippocampus, which is the regular long-term memory.
I could listen to you all day. I feel like a lot of people are like, what is happening? And this is literally like all of my favorite research in one space, because I don't believe that there is that separation of science and faith. I believe it's all orchestrated perfectly because we're divinely made. And when we actually understand it from not only a language perspective, but an application perspective, it allows, I think, in my personal experience, my faith to be that much bigger, and the potential and the possibility, not only of healing, but of miracles. And because when we're here and we're praying and we're like laying hands on someone, right? And you're thinking, oh, this isn't possible. And yet God has told us already that we will do far greater things than he who did it here on earth as it is in heaven. Is the possibility of we're actually extracting something like that in the moment. And so to look from like a granular perspective of that, like you said, that word extraction, and removing it and then replacing it, it's almost like a fresh seed so that new fruit can grow versus the dead, rotten fruit that's been growing. It gives me hope.
Yeah, I think of Deuteronomy. It says, I put before you life or death, blessing or cursing. So choose life so that you and your descendants may live. And it's like so factual. It's not just like, so like, oh, you and your descendants may live. It's like, hello, this is like genetic. Like you are choosing life right now because there's such thing called transgenerational trauma that if you're not correcting it now, you're going to pass it on to your offspring if you haven't had kids already. So the reality is there is a phenomenon known as epigenetics that we can, based on the environment, based on where we choose to place our mind, we can choose life over our body. We can override our blueprints of genetics just by how we perceive the world and what we choose to allow in. If we accept love and light versus darkness, right? It's so incredible. And so what I love, I'm going to read you some scripture. I am the true vine and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch that does not bear fruit, and every branch that bears fruit, he prunes it so that it may be more fruitful. What I think about when I hear the scripture are the dendritic connections of the neurons, right? That he's pruning the ones that he needs to prune, and he's making the ones stronger that need to be made stronger. And it's just so fantastic because I mean, I think even science and scripture confirms neuroplasticity and how we have to hold our thoughts captive to Christ in everything that we do.
So cool. It's so crazy because I think people, they don't associate the two. And I don't know where in history that bondage or that breakage occurred. But I love, in my perspective, I feel like even things like energy, things like manifestation, these conversations that most people would quote as woo-woo are actually coming back into alignment of the Christianity, because people are realizing that that was always God's idea. It's biblically based, like everything in that realm. And so I wonder how, as you teach and help people come into that belief system, do you ever experience like rejection in understanding of the combination?